Death, taxes, and the Knicks missing out on star players. It feels like throughout my entire life, the Knicks are always putting together some grand plan to assemble a title contender overnight through free agency and via trade, only to have it fall through, leaving them with just the most underwhelming of consolation prizes. Back in the summer of 2010, they planned to assemble a big three similar to the one that Miami did, or at the very least, sign LeBron, but instead just ended up with Amari Stoudemire with only 1 year left on his knees. In the summer of 2019, more recently, the Knicks had planned to sign Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and simultaneously draft Zion Williamson, only to end up with just RJ Barrett and to have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant sign with a crosstown rival. Fast forward to this offseason, and the Knicks are the front runners to acquire Donovan Mitchell, but just wasn't meant to be, and pretty much walked away with only Jalen Brunson and Isaiah Hartenstein to show for it. And by no means is Brunson a bad consolation prize, nor were Amari Stoudemire or RJ Barrett for that matter. I even like Hartenstein. He's a really solid backup center, but it's still disappointing if you're a Knicks fan to constantly have your organization overpromise and underdeliver. But if I can extend an olive branch to the organization, the Cavs undercutting the Knicks for Donovan Mitchell is actually going to end up being better for the long-term health of this franchise, in my opinion. So based on the rumors I've heard and the high price that the Cavs paid to acquire Donovan Mitchell, I think it's pretty safe to say the Knicks were likely looking at giving up RJ Barrett and pretty much all of their draft capital, which means if the Knicks had acquired Donovan Mitchell, that would have pretty much been a final piece of the puzzle type move for them. With all their draft picks tied up, there'd be no room to make any other significant upgrades along the roster outside of swapping around a few role players. So while, yes, Donovan Mitchell would have been an immediate upgrade to this team, but on the other hand, where are you really going if the core of your team is Julius Randle, Donovan Mitchell, and Jalen Brunson? Especially with how good the East is now. Maybe they would have been able to leapfrog the Raptors and Bulls, but I think there would have been almost no chance that they would have been better than the Heat, Celtics, Bucks, 76ers, or Nets. So at best, they would have been looking at a sixth seed kind of going forward, but more than likely it would have been a play-in tournament. That's just not worth it in my mind when that's your one big move to try and compete for a title. So I think it works out. It just seems better for them to kind of continue to let RJ Barrett develop and play the long game here. And also, now that the Cavs have kind of pushed their chips in, the Knicks have the best trade package to offer for the next disgruntled star. And given all of the drama that just surrounds this league, they're likely not going to have to wait too long for that to happen. As for this season, the Knicks are currently sitting at a projected 38 and a half wins. And I guess I'm begrudgingly going to take the over. I'm not super confident about that, but they won 37 games last year, and this team has undoubtedly improved this year. I could easily see this group finishing around 500. They seem fairly committed to winning, so I can't see them bottoming out and entering that Wembanyama sweepstakes, even if that's probably what they should do at this point. And with the Charlotte Hornets likely taking a pretty significant step back after losing Miles Bridges, or likely losing Miles Bridges for the season, I would say that the Knicks are front runners for that final play-in spot, competing with Washington and maybe a frisky Detroit or Orlando team. So yeah, if you're a Knicks fan, brace yourself for another super underwhelming season. As for the direction of this franchise as a whole, if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be confused. They seem to think that they're a lot closer to being a competitive team than they actually are. And it just doesn't feel like the front office and the coaching staff are on the same page based on what we saw from them last season. So, just to quickly summarize what I mean, go back to last summer, and the Knicks' big offseason acquisition was Kemba Walker, but almost immediately, Tibbs just removed him from the rotation. And in fairness to Tibbs, like everyone, I guess, including him, with exception to the Knicks front office, knew that Kemba Walker was washed, but it was just weird to see them just tout him out there as this big free agency signing while the coaching staff was prepared to just cast him away at the first sign of trouble. Then later on in the year, they end up trading for Cam Reddish, and almost immediately it was clear that nobody involved here was on the same page. crazy idea here, but when you trade for a guy, I don't know, maybe you want to play him like a little bit, but that just wasn't the case for Cam here. Tibbs just buried him on the end of the bench, which I don't think is what the front office had in mind. And I know Cam Reddish didn't have that in mind since almost immediately he started complaining about his playing time. So from the outside looking in, it looked like Leon Rose and the front office traded for Cam and kind of promised him a role on the team and then didn't consult with Thibodeau at all, or did consult with him, and Tibbs said he wasn't interested in Cam Reddish, but then Rose trades makes the trade anyway. Then, out of like spite and contempt, Tibbs was just not playing Cam Reddish out of like sheer defiance. It's not like they had other guys who were lighting it up at those positions. Even in the case of that trade, if like Tibbs and this front office were on the same page, it's just really weird to trade for a guy and then have zero plan for how you want to integrate him. So this is probably a situation where the coaching staff is at odds with the front office, or I guess the best case scenario here is they're just not on the same page. I think it's something to definitely keep an eye on this season. I do feel like if the Knicks are pretty slow out of the gate, I wouldn't be totally shocked if Thibodeau got fired here pretty early on. Jalen Brunson, that whole signing is also really confusing to me and probably not for the reasons that you think. I actually don't totally hate the contract that they gave him. I'm not jumping up and down excited about that figure and saying the Knicks got a great deal and great value here. They did overpay, but that's typically what you have to do in free agency to pry somebody away from their prior team. Also, it seems like we're heading towards a pretty huge cap spike here in the next couple of years. So this might actually end up looking like a bargain towards the end of that contract if max guys are getting like $70 million a year, like I hear they might. The part that confuses me about this signing is how the Knicks just moved heaven and earth to make this happen. The Knicks treated this objective like it was sign Jalen Brunson at all costs, like he was LeBron back in the summer of 2010. They moved draft picks to shed salary, including a Jalen Duren pick. So it's not as if these picks were worthless second rounders either. Also, they're likely going to be hit with a tampering charge, which is going to cost them more draft picks. They even hired Jalen Brunson's dad. And I like Jalen Brunson. He's a really solid player, but they really rolled out the red carpet here, and I just don't understand what it really accomplished. I think even if they had just had the cap room to sign Brunson outright, I'm still sort of like meh on this move from a basketball perspective and from like a franchise direction perspective. It makes the team better, sure, but this isn't really changing the Knicks' destiny. And the cost and focus that it took to pull this off just doesn't seem worth it to me. I think the most ironic part of this is if they had showed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving this level of commitment, they're likely in Knicks jerseys right now. But I guess given how this is all played out in Brooklyn, maybe that was for the best. The way the Knicks are treating this, it's like they think that Jalen Brunson was the missing piece. Like now that we've signed Jalen Brunson, all of our problems are solved. But I think most of the league, myself included, see him as really just a nice complementary piece. Like he was perfect for the role he had previous alongside Luka as the secondary playmaker and shot creator. I guess the Knicks feel like he's destined for more, but I just don't think that that's who he is as a player. I don't think this is a situation like James Harden went from Oklahoma City to Houston. It was clear, and we had seen flashes of it, that Harden had a lot more to offer than like a sixth man role. And so now with the Knicks, if Brunson is just a nice piece to have and not somebody that's like a real destiny changer, and RJ Barrett isn't quite ready to take up the mantle as a franchise carrying player, or if he never does, where are the Knicks really going? With a roster full of just uninspiring veterans, I think it's probably just the plan if they're lucky. I guess maybe if Julius Randle gets back to that all NBA level he played at 2 years ago, maybe they can get into the playoffs proper, but that seems really unlikely, even if I do think Randle has become a bit underrated now. He should look a lot better this season now that he doesn't have to play point guard for the Knicks. And the real shame of it all is there's actually a lot of young guys on this team that have shown a lot of promise, but they're stuck having their growth really stunted due to a lack of minutes in this delusional attempt to compete. It's almost identical to the problem I mentioned with during the Kings preview, where they're trying to rebuild and compete at the same time, kind of have their cake and eat it too. And here's what I mean by this. Last year was really the first year where the keys were starting to be turned over to RJ Barrett. If they had gone to that right away when he was a rookie, just imagine how much further he would be along in his development. Same with Mitchell Robinson. Where would he be at if he wasn't competing for playing time throughout his entire career with guys like Nerlens Noel and Taj Gibson in year 50? Then there's Obi Toppin, who looks pretty good when you actually see him out there, but he really hasn't found a steady role with this team yet. It seems like you would want to at least try him out as the small ball five, but I guess that's too risky, and the Knicks don't feel like they can afford to lose any games. Guard wise, Emmanuel Quickly and Quentin Grimes have shown flashes, but they've been stuck behind Alec Burks, Derrick Rose, and Evan Fournier. Pretty much anything to get excited about personnel wise on this Knicks team is a young player who hasn't had the opportunity to really showcase what they can do. This isn't the case of a team having a 20-year-old franchise player coming up on the end of his contract, so they feel like they need to compete to keep him happy. Barrett's only 22 and is the only guy on this team with the potential to be a franchise cornerstone. So wouldn't it make more sense to embrace the youth on this team rather than play these mediocre veterans like Evan Fournier or from last year's team, Taj Gibson, in this futile attempt to win now? I'm not advocating that the Knicks need to tear down this entire team down to the studs, but play the young guys for a year or two. Let them go through their growing pains and see what you have. I just don't understand sacrificing the development of the young players on this roster to fight for a play in spot and at best get totally embarrassed in the first round.